talking to you about how you can play your role in India's internet governance. And conducting this discussion, we have Samiran Gupta, the head of India for ICANN and a veteran in business strategy and public affairs. And joining him will be Shashank Mehrotra, Managing Director, Detail Operations at Endurance. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Samiran and Shashank to the stage. They're making their way up. All right, they're here. Over to you, gentlemen.
Good morning, everyone. How's audio? Kirit, can you hear us in the back? All right, awesome.
How about me? Can you hear me?
Great.
Okay.
So thank you, folks. Super excited to see a full house here early in the morning. Huge pleasure to welcome Samiran, who is the head of ICANN, distinguished colleague and a good friend. And we changed this session a little bit from the way that we had designed it originally. And let me just spend a few minutes talking about why we did that. So Samiran and I have been talking for many years on issues of internet governance and net neutrality and how the internet is really shaping in India. And we've been doing these conversations over coffee. In fact, we had one till midnight last night. And upon his urging, we decided to carry the conversation here for you guys. And hopefully we will touch upon various topics from the role of ICANN, how the internet is governed, why you should care, the new TLD program, and generally have a little bit of fun. We solicit your questions and would love to hear from you at the end of the chat. And so that's sort of the format here. A little bit of context, before we kind of get things kicked off. You will see multiple speakers today, put up slides about how the internet has grown in India, right? And it has been a tremendous growth over the last 18 to 24 months, right? All of us have been a part of that in many different ways. And if you look at sort of what's really powered that and what really goes into making the internet work, we really feel like it's a topic that all of us should really care about, right? And we'll sort of spend some time chatting about that. I want to throw up a little graphic here, a little sort of tongue-in-cheek graphic. If Priyank, you want to put that up on the. Can you throw up that graphic, please? So, how many people have heard of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Show of hands. All right. So, Maslow's hierarchy of needs really talks about, as human beings, right? What are the things that we really care about, right? So we first start with, food and shelter and water, and then, we move on to more evolved pursuits. And, I think that all of us can really relate to this, right? When you head somewhere and you don't have internet access or Wi-Fi, you start to get, pretty agitated. The internet has really become a very integral part of what we do, right? It's the roti, kapda, makan, internet, type of analogy here, right? And I think it's sort of, with that introduction that I want to get started out, Samiran, and,
Sure.
Maybe pose the first question to you, which is, we talk about internet governance, right? And those are complicated words, but, could you start out by defining that for us and telling us what that's all about?
Sure, Shashank. But before I start, let me first thank the hosts for having me here today and all of you for showing up. I know Sridhar was kind of ringing you guys in, but thank you so much for coming. So, Shashank, let me tell you that, when the internet was first kind of thrown open to the general public, the idea was to keep it open and simple and accessible to the public. So when you say internet governance, I know it's a scary term, but all it means is it's a development of applications of shared principles, okay, norms and rules, which allow the internet to function and grow. Let's keep it very simple. So, and these rules and norms are not created by, let's say, a government, but it's actually created by you and me. It's us who are part of the industry who are in the forefront of creating these norms and regulations.
Right, right. So, when you talk about sort of the different, the internet is it's almost like a living, breathing thing, right? It's everywhere and nobody really controls it. But, if you could spend a few minutes, Samiran, talking about there are certainly a number of bodies.
Absolutely.
There's Ietf, there's ICANN, there's W3C, there's, ISOC, there's all these different organizations. There are local, for example, governments who manage or look at different aspects of the internet.
Right.
What are they? What are the most important ones? How do they come together? Because it seems, like a complicated set of things to understand.
Yeah. Actually, Shashank, you're absolutely right. It's quite amazing how the governance of internet has evolved over the last 20-odd years. So I'm going to start, I'm a little biased towards my own organization, so I'm going to start with ICANN and what we do. So when you go to the internet and you're searching for a website, you put in a name. That name actually corresponds to a number, as you all know. So what ICANN does is actually maintain this whole universe of names, numbers, and the related protocols attached to it. So that is our primary function, and around those names, numbers, and protocols, what we are trying to do is maintain security, stability, and resilience of the domain name system. Okay? In other words, if you look back into history, find that the internet has never really gone down. And the reason it doesn't go down is, many of you would know, I'm sure, is because it's a distributed system. There's no one server which is controlling everything as the information flows. So I'm going to stop here vis-a-vis ICANN.
Right.
But let me also now talk about some of the other institutions that you mentioned. And one of them is, and very importantly so, is the Ietf, the Internet Engineering Task Force, which actually creates the norms and standards through a series of requests for comments, which, anyone who has, let's say, a question or a suggestion to make can put up and get it discussed, and it could become part of the evolution of the internet.
Right.
And there are other bodies which are involved.
Right. So I see you've got that sort of scary looking
Oh my God, that's up,
graphic
right?
there. Why don't you want to take a couple minutes?
Let me just go down and explain how that works.
Yeah.
It's really busy, so I apologize if you're sitting way back there. You may not be able to see it. Okay. So the way we look at the internet, we look at it as if it's in 3 layers. The first layer is the infrastructure segment, which is right down here. What is the infrastructure? It's really the various networks, the telecom networks, the satellite networks that exist. Okay? Most of these networks, and there are about 80 to 85,000 of those, most of these networks are in the private sector. Okay? And I'm going to jump right to the top, which is what we call the economic and societal layer. So we have the infrastructure layer right at the bottom, and on top is the economic and societal layer where you and I live and exist. This is where we use our cell phones. This is where governments talk to people. This is where policies are made. This is where social media happens. This is where television gets on internet. Now, the challenge is, how do you take what's on the internet and use the networks, which are right down here, the green layer, and take it to the people who are using it? It only happens because of this orange layer in the middle, which is called the logical layer. Now, the logical layer is where ICANN, for example, sits, where we're really looking at root servers, domain names, IP addresses, protocol parameters. Now, if you look at the extreme right-hand column, you will see all the various bodies and organizations which are involved in running the internet. I'm not going to repeat the names because there are many and you can go and Google them and you'll find them. But the key principle over here is that it's a system which is built bottom-up by the participation of users, technical community, also the government, okay? But be very clear, it's not headed by the government, you know? It is built and used and run by the people. So let me come back.
Cool. Thanks, Samiran. So there's certainly a lot of different players in this, but maybe if you could touch upon the democratic nature of this, because I think I've had this question many times, right? Given this complex sort of stakeholder ecosystem,
right?
Is there one body that controls all of it, or is it truly sort of multiple stakeholders? How do you make decisions? I mean, how do you get anything done with this big complex chart?
Well, and that's a great question. The way it works is essentially a system of mutual self-respect. Every institution that works on the internet, whether it's the Ietf, whether it's Internet Society, ISOC, whether it's ICANN, all of us have deep mutual respect for each other and what each other is supposed to do in this continuum. For example, ICANN does 3 public meetings a year across the globe where we invite people, it's free of charge, to come, and there are maybe 14 or 15 tracks of conversations which are taking place. So everything from new GTLDs to language localization to security and stability of the root zone, all of that is discussed. Ietf invites us to their conferences so that we can provide the link to the domain name system and to the standards that they are creating. So there is a mutual kind of understanding that has developed over the last 20 years, and this process is called the multi-stakeholder model.
Right.
Okay? It differs from what is known as a multilateral model, where governments talk to each other and create policies, but in multi-stakeholderism, it's the users who are connecting.
Sure. Changing, track, a little bit. India is now the second largest internet population globally, right? I think all of us are using the internet in ways like we never have, right? One of the things which I, personally wonder about, and I think many of us who are in sort of an industry or likewise liaise with government have tried over the years to understand what role we should play, in the international ecosystem which sort of, governs the internet, right? So do you feel that the participation from, you've got 300 million users, are sort of Indian stakeholders correctly or adequately engaged in this ecosystem? What's your take on that?
Again, a great question. The short and not so pleasant answer to this is there isn't enough Indian participation in the governance of the internet. And this is very important, and the reason I wanted to come and speak to all of you today, and the reason I've roped in my good friend Shashank to be with me on stage, is to convey the message that as the demographics or as the world moves from English language internet to local language internet, we need participation in internet governance from various countries, including India, where the growth of the internet is expected to take place.
Right.
Having said that, even before one looks at an international exposure or participation, it's very important to create, sustain, and develop a local infrastructure around internet governance. And I'm working with as many stakeholders possible, including all of you over here, to try and do that.
Right. So maybe a question that, I don't know if you guys are sort of scratching your heads thinking, how can you get involved? Or why should you care, right? I mean, you're a small web hosting provider based in, in Surat. You have a thriving clientele where you offer domain names and, email solutions, right? You run a successful, web design organization, right? How do I connect to this ecosystem? How do I start thinking about participating? Or shall I say, koi aur karega, let somebody else figure this out?
So, Shashank, I believe you've asked me two questions. There's a why and a how.
Right.
So I'm going to start with the how first. Several cities in India have chapters of the Internet Society, such as Mumbai, Chennai, Kolkata, Bangalore, and Delhi. You should look up your local chapter, and if there are any chapter members over here, they ought to identify themselves, and you should try and find out what they're doing and become part of that. But apart from that, there are also internet societies in various institutions and colleges, or even if you come from a town where there isn't any of this, you may want to take the initiative and get some like-minded people together and create a chapter. Now that's the how. And let's talk about the why. Mm-hmm. Now, with the why, there are various ways of answering the question, but I'm going to give one example. Imagine a time in the future where you could be sitting in Surat, your web browser is in Gujarati, and you're planning a trip, a vacation to Kruger National Park in South Africa to take your family for a vacation. And guess what? Their website is no longer in English.
Right.
It's in a local language. It's in Swahili. Now, how will you get that information? I know this is a very simplistic example I'm giving, but the point is, it's exactly that. The internet is going to be moving beyond the English language, and you need to be aware and involved in terms of what's happening and be part of the process of creating the rules and norms for this transition to take place.
Great, thanks. That's helpful. Cool. So we'll pivot a little bit more to another topic which has been sort of fairly active in the news, right? The Government of India's Digital India initiative, right? We're starting to see, our government really get out there and talk publicly about, our population and more specifically our internet population, right? How do you think the Digital India initiative, how does that dovetail into the work that you're doing at ICANN? And, the Honorable Minister for Information Technology made a, fairly, I think, impassioned, speech at ICANN,
right.
recently as well. Tell us a little bit more about that. How's the government connecting into this ecosystem?
Right. Okay. So, the Digital India program is essentially to bring, literally, all governance tools to the citizen in the palm of their hands. Eventually, you should be able to negotiate this whole process of paying taxes or paying your electricity bills, which you can do even now, but in those places where it's completely government controlled. Maybe if your child gets a scholarship, do the banking around the scholarship, all through applications which sit on your phone. The government has sort of pledged to the tune of $7 billion to develop the Digital India program. Now, the Digital India program essentially is the creation or expansion of the telecom networks, and on top of that, an invitation to apps developers to start building apps and using them, and obviously for the citizen to use them. Now, so we see that as being the engine of the expansion of internet penetration in India. Now, there are some nuances to this, because you're going to look at multiple languages being used. It may not all be in English. It could be in Hindi. It could be in Marathi, various languages. So we see a lot of benefits coming to people eventually, to the common citizen, through this process, but it's going to take a little time.
Right.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. The new GTLD program has been one of the most talked about, I think, programs, especially in our industry, which is the domain names and hosting industry over the last few years.
Right.
Quick show of hands: how many folks are familiar with what new TLDs are, or actively sell them today, or plan to sell them? All right, so fair degree of representation. So it's been a couple of years, Samiran, right? And
right.
If you look at these statistics, we have about 10 million or so, 10.5 million new TLDs which are under registration. There's about 2,000 or so applications, of which I think 700 are these generic strings, and the remaining are sort of specific non-generic or
right. company
strings, right? And 50% of the domain name registrations today come from a single TLD, right? So it's been an interesting couple of years. Do you want to take a couple of minutes and talk about in the the back corridors of ICANN, what are people saying about the NTLD program? How do you guys perceive it?
So let me just step back and actually take a moment to explain, and I should have done that a little earlier, what ICANN does apart from maintaining the domain name system that I did. You see, our role is to work with the community. Now, within the ICANN ecosystem, there are 7 communities. They're broadly categorized as supporting organizations and advisory committees. Okay, sometime in the late 2000s, 2008, 9, maybe 7, 8, there was a movement within these communities which said that, look, for the longest time we've had 19 or 21, right side of the dot extensions. It's time to grow that out. The technology is robust, and maybe it could be used for branding purposes. So the process to get to new GTLDs, the process that started 2 years ago, it took almost 7 years for standards and norms to be developed. And all ICANN's role is to essentially create that platform, the technology platform, where you can go and bid for a new GTLD, and then find ways to resolve disputes and make sure that the technology is robust and stable. Now, that's the past. Where are we today? When the first round of applications was sought 2 years ago, roughly 2,000 applicants, and many of them were companies, applied. Almost all but 200, roughly 200, are still remain to be delegated. Many of the delegated strings are still not being used. I think that's reality. I think the real issue over here is market demand and supply. Everything takes its own time, and .xyz has picked up. .top has picked up. Many others haven't picked up as much. Many of them are very niche. They are not expected to become huge blockbusters, but they address a purpose. So that's really where it is right now.
Right. And I mean, I promised to ask some tricky and fun questions also. But those of us who follow the industry have been also watching closely at the sort of, shall I say, the war chest that ICANN has generated now with this process, right? So for the audience, through the process of these applications, ICANN has collected to the tune of $280 million, which is about almost 2,000 crores, as part of the application process for, and given the charter of the organization, what's the plan for that money? What are you guys doing with it?
So, firstly, I must mention that ICANN is a non-profit, and I can assure you that we're not getting fat bonuses from that war chest, as you describe it. But what we are, the way the money is meant to be used, it's called a risk reserve, okay? And there are elements of risk that we had identified when we started the process. The first was, the whole process of initial evaluation, development of the services, and of course, unanticipated costs. I mean, there could be some very serious litigation that could take place. If we go through this whole process of delegating the broadly 2,000, new TLDs, beyond that, once we've covered our costs, and if there's money left behind, that money is expected to go towards policy development. Now, what is policy development? It could be a program which could be initiated in a certain part of the world to help create more internet awareness or penetration. The decision to use that residual money is not ICANN's. It's again the communities. So a task force is working on it. Hopefully some point next year, between March and June next year, we should have a good idea of how that is going to be used.
Great, thanks. One thing that we've been chatting about, and I know this is a topic that comes up frequently, is that the internet is still very English.
Yes.
Right? And especially when you look at it in sort of so in the emerging economies, like China has a very vibrant sort of Mandarin or Chinese language internet, right? The internet in India is still predominantly English, right? And by some measures, everybody who is English speaking and should be or could be on the internet is already there, right? So when you look at the way in which the internet will develop now in the next 2, 3, 4 years, we need to add, many, the next 100, 200 million people who will come on, speak Bhojpuri and Marathi and Gujarati and Tamil and Telugu and Kannada, right? And we struggle with this, by the way, ourselves, which is how do you enable those folks to come online, right? Because across the entire ecosystem, from the domain names and the IDNs to the keyboards, many of the pieces don't seem to be there. It's changing. I think it's changing very dramatically and rapidly, but tell us what your thoughts are on that.
So, if you pull out a 500 rupee note from your pockets or a 1,000 rupee note, you'll see the oath that is printed on that note in 7 or 8 languages. Okay, those 8 languages are the Neo-Brahmi. They're classified as the Neo-Brahmi languages of this country. The Neo-Brahmi languages straddle both North and South India. It's all pervasive. And coming out of these 8 languages are 21 scripts. Okay. Now, ICANN is, again, working with the local community here, led by CDAC and linguists and IT engineers to create the sort of the ASCII version of these 21 scripts so that the words and the language can be put into the root zone. One of the biggest problems of language computing is searchability. The second problem is obviously content. You need to have content that is searchable. Right. But we are taking the first step, and this is again a place where all of us can play a role in making sure that the words can, and the languages get translated into ASCII. Now, one of the challenges is a lot of Indian languages use conjoined words. If you say the word mitra, there is a tra, which is a conjoined letter. And how do you capture that and make sure that it resonates the same way or the right way instead of meaning something else. So these are the challenges that people are working on, but we are hopeful that over the next couple of years, we'll have many more Indian languages available in the root zone for people to use.
Great, thanks. One sort of, fun question, fun fact. So I read a couple years back about this secret ceremony that ICANN has, where a bunch of people get together in a room and they exchange keys and it's all very hush-hush. And this ceremony forms the basis for how the domain name system actually works. Any of you guys heard about this ceremony or like seen a video or okay? Yeah. So
I'd urge you to go online and look at the videos. It'll take some of the stress out of it. So what it is essentially there is the root zone, and there are 4 keys or 4 digital keys to the root zone. Okay. The key ceremony is not like a secret society wearing hoods and capes and walking around with candles or anything, but actually we show up at our office in LA once every quarter, and those keys are renewed. Okay, the coding of the keys are renewed, and that precisely is all that happens. Now, who are these individuals? How are they chosen? Why are they there? Would you like to be there? All of these are follow-up questions we can, we can deal with offline. But
fantastic.
But that's really what it is, because the community, the larger community, decided that what is the ultimate security that we could have? All 4 keys should have unique holders.
No, I think it's a very powerful paradigm, and it's inspiring in a way. And when I read about it for the first time, the fact that there is a level of anonymity and those people are distributed, I think it speaks to the power of the internet, right? And what it. So no, it's fascinating to read about. So I'm done. I mean, I'm done with the questions I wrote here, but I'm happy to keep jabbering away here. But why don't we turn it over to to all of you here? I mean, what would you like to sort of pose to Samiran and ask of him?
Two mics, anybody?
Yeah, please go ahead. There's a mic coming in the back there.
Yeah, hi. My name is Kshitij. I run a news media website myself.
Could you speak into the mic, please?
Hello.
Better.
Is it fine, Ram?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I run a news media website myself. All of this localization of internet comes as a challenge for me as well, because I basically want to reach more and more audience. As far as the international community is concerned, obviously there are other websites that are existing, but I, as an Indian news media provider or article provider, I want to basically reach more and more people. Now, one of the challenges to reach local markets is that the domain name itself has to be typed in English. I suppose we are actually trying for the ASCII models of all of that. So where are we on that specific part, like having Marathi or Devanagari for Lipi domain names?
Excellent question. So there are 2-3 moving parts to this. One is, of course, the language and the words in that language need to be available in the root zone. Okay, but the second part, and a more important part, is the searchability part, and that's where the search engines, such as a Google or a whoever else, they need to
Integrate
make that happen. Okay. Now, I know they too are working on it, but this is a good question, because eventually, like all things on the internet, it usually works on demand and supply. Now, if there is more Marathi names or Marathi content being generated, it'll get more and more searchable. So it's a bit of a chicken and an egg situation, but you have to get started somewhere to push the other players to participate.
Right. So where is ICANN on that part? Like, as far as the root zone is concerned, like putting in the ASCII
So,
variant.
as I said, we have a Neo-Brahmi panel, which is, in our terms, quote-unquote, seated. There are 21, maybe 27 or 28 members today. It is headed by a very eminent linguist, from Vishwabharati University, Shantiniketan, Uday Narayan Singh. And we've had a couple of rounds of meetings. We are expecting this panel to come up with their final, list of recommendations sometime between March, maybe April and June next year. However, what happens is, once that is done, ICANN will then take all of that and put it into the public domain for comments. Because, we've got 21 people here. There could be a linguist sitting in Paris who may have some inputs into this. And eventually, that process is another 6 months. And so maybe sometime in 2017, you can see a lot more languages being available.
Thank you.
Sir.
Yeah, my name is Sunil. So I'm into the media and digital marketing. Now I have two questions for you. The first question is, you talked a lot about localization. So I wanted to understand as to how would you factor in, say, future technological innovations, or say the disruptive innovation factor, Internet of Things, IPv6, etc. And the second question is, you said India currently is not involved in governance to that extent. So, given the current political dispensation, which is in favor of India getting a greater role in world affairs, so how would you say practically get India a bigger role?
Okay. So let me start with the second question first, and then I'll probably ask you to remind me what the first question was. But the second question is, what is the government of India doing currently, the current government of India? I can share with you that the issue of internet governance is a very important topic for the government of India. The government of India looks at it from a very interesting perspective. They look at it from the perspective of providing security, Either he speaks or I do.
We'll give them a minute. Come back to you then.
Sorry. I think I can continue now. So the government of India looks at this from the perspective of providing security from online attacks to Indian institutions and the public. Okay, they're very concerned about cyber attacks, cyber threats, and from that perspective, they're very engaged. They're engaged to the point that there are 3 ministries, or actually 2 ministries, and the Prime Minister's office, which are involved in this process. Okay, the key ministries is the Ministry of Communication and Information Technology, and of course the Ministry of External Affairs, and along with the Prime Minister's office. So this is the first time in years we've seen a very clear direction emerging from the government on these issues. Your first question was around future adoption of technologies. The introduction of IPv6 over the last few years has obviously thrown open a much larger, sort of set of numbers which are available. Now, the Internet of Things is starting to come up very quickly. I think the challenge right now is for users again, the community and the government, to work together to figure out what should be the standards, and what is good for India, and that's really where the conversation should start taking place. It's possibly not a very satisfactory answer, but that's all I can say at this point.
Yes, sir. Gentlemen, yeah, you, please.
Hello. Sir, I'm facing some voice problem today, but I'll try to do it. Sir, suppose I have a domain which is rajputsamajmumbai.com, and we are going for a Devanagari domain similarly whenever it is coming. Now, is it possible that someone typing in English will reach to my page?
That, my friend, is the future of the internet. It won't happen immediately, but hopefully, over a period of time, that is what we are looking to do. Eventually, English will be just one of the languages that the internet is available on, as opposed to today being the primary language. There's no question it's the primary language that we use on the internet. But that's really where the next level of internet should evolve to. It's not going to happen in a hurry. It's a process of demand and supply. Technology is always there. There are a lot of bright people across the globe to make it happen. But there has to be a demand, and then there'll be supply.
I think we have time for maybe one more question.
Yes.
Okay. Somebody on. Yes, sir, please.
Yes, I'm Kirti Singh. And what I have seen about localization is that it depends a lot on the input language of the keyboard. Like from my experience in dealing with, there was a project which the government was trying to have people put Hindi characters. So they were still putting in the English words. Everything was in English, except the labels were in Hindi or in local language. So if the input language is English, so I believe that is a big change needs to be happening at that end. Because it all starts there. Well, reading is something different. You can read Hindi, whatever language, but when you're inputting, the input language is always by default English. And very few people know how to type in Hindi on a Hindi keyboard, on Punjabi keyboard, on whatever keyboard. So this is my...
It's a great question, if somebody, if I could jump in for just a second here. So I think you're starting to see a lot of companies, individuals, both very large internet firms, small startups, individuals, really start to embrace this question, which is how do you get the how do you get the content onto the internet in the local language to begin with, right? You're right, the keyboard is a pretty significant component of that. Do you use WhatsApp? So WhatsApp has this transliteration feature now, right? As do many of the chat sort of systems that we start use today, right? And if you see, those systems have started to get significantly more advanced, right, in the last few years, right? So today, where you have a transliterated sort of input, right, you also have a native input, for example, right? So you do have a native Hindi input, and I think over time, I can tell you because, we do engage with many of these folks at these larger organizations. Many of them are working on ways to get content in through better keyboards, etc. And it's only a question of time. I think I think all of us, Samiran, I don't know what you think.
I'm in complete agreement with you. It's a matter of time, and I hate to sound like a broken record. It's about demand and supply. As long as there's going to be demand, a solution will be supplied. I
mean, there's 4 questions. All of them were really on localization, right? So I think we are looking at the next. We were at a conference recently, Vikas, and we were meeting with some folks at a very large internet company. They have a whole division dedicated to content monetization, development in, let's say, local languages, right? So there are people today who are making, a significant amount of money monetizing local language blogs. So there's an entire ecosystem out there which is coming online as we speak, right, built around this. So it's a pretty exciting time to be watching this. I think we're out of time, so we will take your leave. Samiran, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Huge pleasure to have you.
Thanks.
And thanks, folks, for your engaged participation.
Thank you so much, Samiran and Shashank, for what I know that our audience found a very interesting discussion to understand those complex layers of digital governance. So thank you very much.